You were awake for this. That's the first thing to understand. You're lying on your back and hands are holding your head still. More hands than you can count, because it takes several people to keep someone from moving during what comes next. Somebody is kneeling over you with a piece of sharpened flint, and they are going to open your skull, not quickly. There's no quick way to do this with a stone. They start to scrape. A small patch of scalp first, and the scalp bleeds the way scalps do, far more than seems fair, then underneath the bone. And they scrape, and they rest their hand, and they scrape again. And this goes on, not for seconds, but for the better part of an hour, while you lie there and feel a great deal of it. You agreed to this. That's the part to hold on to. Somewhere out there, right now, someone is lying awake in the dark, wishing they could reach into their own head and take out the thing that's wrong. The thought that won't leave. The grief that has a physical weight behind the eyes, the sense that the problem is a solid object lodged somewhere inside the skull, and that if they could just get to it, they could pull it out. People have been trying to do exactly that for at least 7,000 years. And here's what you already assume about them: that they were primitive, that this was superstition or torture, or both. That a person whose skull was opened with a rock in the dirt, with no medicine and no anesthetic, simply died. Of the shock or the bleeding or the infection a few days later. You'd be wrong. Most of the time, you'd be wrong. We know because of the bone. When you cut a hole in a living skull and the person dies soon after, the edges of that hole stay sharp, raw, exactly as the blade left them. But when the person lives, the bone does something else. It heals. The rim rounds off, grows smooth, remodels itself over months and years, the way any broken bone knits back together. So a skull with a hole in it tells you, unmistakably, which one happened. Sharp edges, they died. Smooth edges, they lived and kept living, long enough for the bone to close. And when you line up these skulls from across the ancient world, the majority of the edges are smooth. They lived. How many lived is the part that should stop you. In ancient Peru, researchers studied around 800 opened skulls, more than the rest of the world combined. In the time of the Inca, somewhere between 3/4 and 4/5 of those patients survived. Roughly 4 out of 5 people walked away from having their skull cut open with a blade of bronze or stone. Now hold that next to this. During the American Civil War, more than 3 centuries later, in field hospitals with metal instruments and trained surgeons, close to half of the patients undergoing similar operations on the skull died. The people with the stone tools did better, not a little better, twice as well, 400 years earlier. In fact, in the 1860s, when one of these healed Inca skulls was carried into a room full of the best doctors in New York, they refused to believe it. A hole cut clean through the bone, healed smooth around every edge. And they could not accept that anyone in the ancient Andes had done it and kept the patient alive, because their own hospitals at that very moment couldn't. So the obvious question is the one you're already asking: how? How does a person survive their skull being scraped open, awake, with no way to numb the pain? Part of the answer is the strangest fact in this whole story. Your brain cannot feel pain. There are no pain receptors in the brain itself, none. Surgeons today operate on conscious patients with the skull open and the brain exposed, and the person lies there awake, talking, feeling nothing, while their brain is worked on. The pain in opening a head isn't in the head, it's in the scalp, which is dense with nerves, and a little in the thin membrane just under the bone. The bone between them is nearly silent. Cutting through the skull hurts less than the first cut through the skin above it. The ancient surgeons had somehow found the narrow path through this. Scrape slowly. Take the scalp, take the bone, but stop at the membrane over the brain, because to tear through that was to let in the infection that killed. The ones who learned to stop in time had patients who lived, and across the centuries in Peru, you can watch them learning. The survival rate climbs, generation after generation, from roughly 4 in 10 in the earliest period to more than 8 in 10 by the end. 1,000-year apprenticeship, written in healed bone. They weren't getting lucky. They were getting better. But the deepest question isn't how they did it, it's why. Sometimes the reason is right there on the skull. A fracture, a caved-in patch where a club or a sling stone had struck and the hole cut right beside it to lift the pressure. That makes a grim kind of sense. That's surgery. That's a wound and a treatment. And then there are the others, the skulls with a neat healed hole and no injury at all. Nothing broken, nothing to treat. A head opened not to close a wound, but for some other reason. One we can't fully recover, because the people who held that reason left no writing behind. Only bone. Consider one of them. In eastern France, the skull of a man who lived around 7,000 years ago. He was about 50 when he died, and in his skull there are two openings, not one, two, and both of them are fully healed, smooth all the way around, which means he was opened once and survived it, lived, healed, and then at some point was opened again and survived that too. There's no sign of any wound on him, no fracture, no blow. Someone made two holes in this man's head on two separate occasions for reasons that left no other trace. And he lived both times and died, years later, of something else entirely. Why would you open a healthy person's skull? What did they believe was in there that opening the head could let out? We don't know. And it's important to be honest about that. It may have been a spirit they were releasing, a demon of headache or madness or seizures. But that's not the same as believing the mind lives in the brain. A spirit in the head is a different idea entirely, and we can't read which one they held from a hole in a bone. All we can say for certain is the shape of the impulse. They had located the wrongness inside the head, and they believed that if they opened it, the wrongness might come out. And that impulse, that exact one, never left us. There's a strange piece of evidence for how deliberate all this was. In France, archaeologists found the skull of a cow from around 5,000 years ago with a hole scraped in it using the very same technique used on people. The animal shows no sign of healing, so it didn't survive, if it was ever meant to. And one reading of it is quietly astonishing, that someone was practicing, perfecting the cut on an animal before they tried it on a living person's head. That isn't superstition, that's a craft being refined. Now come forward, all the way forward to within living memory. In the 20th century, a doctor named Agus Moniz proposed that mental illness was caused by fixed, broken patterns of thought, lodged physically in the front of the brain, and that if you went in and severed them, you could set the patient free. He won a Nobel Prize for it. Another doctor took the idea and made it fast and portable and did it through the eye socket with an instrument like an ice pick. In the United States alone, it was done around 50,000 times, the lobotomy. Look at what it actually was, the belief that suffering is a thing inside the head, that if you open the head and reach the right place, you can take the suffering out, that the person will be better for it. It's the same belief held by the hands around your skull 7,000 years ago in the dirt with the flint. We'd traded the stone for a steel pick and the open sky for an operating room. The idea underneath hadn't moved an inch. We still open heads today. We do it in sterile rooms with the lights bright and the pain switched off, and we call it surgery, and it saves lives. The tools changed completely. The wish did not. So go back to the beginning. Back to the person lying awake in the dark tonight, wishing they could reach in and lift out the thing that's wrong. They didn't know what was really in there. Neither, if you're honest, do you. But you both believed the same thing, that the wrongness was somewhere inside the head, and that if you could just get it open, it might finally come out. They picked up a stone. You just lie there and wish you could. It's the same wish. And it is very, very old.